Here's the fact that most people miss about the new California Republic. By the time of Fallout New Vegas, the NCR is the largest, wealthiest, and most institutionally civilized post war nation in North America. And it's already failing. It isn't losing a war, and it isn't collapsing overnight. It's failing structurally. Its army is stretched across hundreds of miles of frontier. Its currency is losing the public's trust. Its political system is increasingly shaped by landowners, contracts, and wartime incentives. And most NCR citizens still believe they're living in the most successful civilization that the wasteland has ever produced. That belief is what makes the collapse possible, because empires rarely fall when people stop believing in them. They fall when belief prevents people from notice what's breaking. The new California Republic isn't Fallout's most dangerous faction, and that's not because it's cruel, but because it's familiar. It believes in democracy, personal liberty, and rule of law. It restores courts, election, currency, and civilian government. In a world that has forgotten all of them, for millions of people, the NCR represents the return of something close to normal life. They have stabilized agriculture, organized trade, access to doctors and schools, and the slow replacement of scavenging with wage work. At its height, the NCR is not really surviving, it's governing, and it's planning. It's building the kind of systems that only exist when society expects tomorrow to happen. And that's the point. This documentary isn't a faction ranking, it isn't a morality play. It's a systemic breakdown of what happens when a republic built to protect its citizens begins to behave like an empire trying to feed itself. And if you already know where the story ends, that's fine, because the more interesting question is how it got there. The NCR doesn't fall because the wasteland is cruel. It falls because success creates appetites, and appetites create expansion. And expansion quietly changes the type of country that you are. We're going to trace that process, the rise, the strain, and the turning points that take the NCR from the best thing the wasteland has ever produced to something that at the end couldn't hold itself together. The NCR's decline does not begin with one dramatic catastrophe, it begins with accumulation. Financial strain grows slowly, disguised by expansion and wartime spending. Over time, the Republic shifts towards fiat money, and while the exact causes are debated in the universe and out of it, it's widely believed this loss of hard backing was accelerated by the Brotherhood conflict and the vulnerability of the NCR reserves during that era. What matters isn't the technical details of a gold standard in the apocalypse. What matters is the result. Confidence erodes. Political influence concentrates. After President Taney's era, anti cartel protections weaken, then fully disappear. Powerful ranchers and Brahma barons consolidate land and supply chains. Policy starts banning towards the groups that can fund campaigns, feed the cities, and equip the armies. On paper, the NCR remains democratic, but in practice, access to that power becomes uneven, and the frontier feels it first. Meanwhile, the NCR military grows faster than logistics. Supply lines stretch, garrisons are under strength, veteran leadership is diluted by the need to field bodies. Equipment shortages creep in quietly. Older rifles, inconsistent armor, and recruits deployed before they're ready. At the same time, the NCR faces competition from every direction. Caesar's Legion pressures the Eastern Front, not by matching institutions, but by exploiting slow decisions and the divided command. The Brotherhood hoards technology the NCR wants and sometimes depends on. New Vegas resists annexation while benefiting from the NCR's protection. Smaller factions, opportunists, and local powers pull at the edges of NCR authority because they can sense something important. The NCR can't actually afford to be everywhere at once, but it tries anyway. And here's the pattern: whenever pressure increases, the NCR responds in the most human way possible. It keeps trying to expand. The NCR is designed to govern a republic. It is not designed to manage an empire. Each expansion adds new borders to defend, new roads to patrol, new courts to staff, new water to secure, and new populations who expect the same services as the core states. A functioning democracy can absolutely do that, but only if the gross is paced by administration, and the NCR never learns to pace itself. And unlike Kaiser's Legion, the NCR does not erase identity to maintain control. It negotiates, it compromises, and it delays decisions through the process. Those traits are moral strength, but they're also strategic weaknesses on a hostile frontier. In a place like the Mojave, where every faction is playing for keeps, and every supply line can be cut, eventually just becomes another word for never. The Mojave is where those weaknesses converge. But to understand the end, we have to go back to the beginning. To understand why the NCR collapses, we first need to understand why it succeeds. Because the seeds of failure are planted at the exact moment the Republic believes it has solved the wasteland. Next, we're going to trace the rise of the NCR from Shady Sands to a five state federation, and we'll look at what it built that no one else could, and what it accidentally trained itself to need. Every empire likes to tell a story about its origins. The NCR stories begin small, deliberately small, because that's what makes it convincing. It didn't start with a conquest, it didn't start with ideology. It merely started with survival. Shady Sands is not founded as a nation or even as a political idea. It is founded because a group of Vault 15 survivors need somewhere to live when the door opens and the world outside turns out to be way worse than they expected. The land is harsh but stable enough. There's water, there's soil, and there are no banners, no uniforms, no standing army. Just people trying to make tomorrow slightly less dangerous than today. This matters because the NCR's legitimacy is rooted in that origin. It doesn't emerge by force, it grows because it works. The first leader of Shady Sands are not conquerors. Aradesh governs cautiously, with an emphasis on defense and diplomacy, rather than expansion. His daughter Tandy inherits not just leadership, but a philosophy. That stability is built, not seized. When raider threats like the Khans are eliminated with outside help, it is treated not as a justification for expansion, but as an opportunity to secure trade routes and improve agriculture. This is the NCR's first real innovation. Not guns, not territory, institutions. Trade agreements, shared defense, and codified laws. Other settlements notice, and for the first time since the Great War, alignment offers more benefits than independence. That's the hook. The New California Republic is not declared because someone wants power. It's declared because enough people want predictability. By 2186, the idea of a federation has gained popular support across multiple settlements. A trial council forms, a constitution is drafted, and in 2189, the NCR officially exists. Not as a city state, but as a union of five states built around major population centers. Shady Sands, Los Angeles, The Hub, Maxon, and Dayglow. Each state brings something different: trade infrastructure, industry, military tradition, agriculture, or just population density. None of them are identical, and that diversity is treated as a strength rather than a liability. This is where the NCR diverges sharply from every other major faction. It doesn't demand sameness, it simply offers membership. For nearly a century, the NCR succeeds, like genuinely succeeds, at something no one else in the wasteland even attempts. It raises the standards of living. Citizens are no longer limited to scavenging and substance farming. Wage labor returns. Mills and factories produce tools, clothing, and consumer goods. Healthcare exists in more than name. Courts exist. They're slow and perfect, but they exist. For most citizens, life becomes more than survival, and that changes psychology. When people stop planning day to day survival, they start planning futures. They want education, property, careers, politics. This is the NCR's greatest achievement, and the moment, its trajectory becomes irreversible. Because complexity is expensive. President Tandy's long tenure stabilizes the Republic through regulation. She understands something that later leaders forget. Left alone, success concentrates power. Her administration limits landowners, curbs Brahmin baron monopolies, and actively restrains merchant houses. Slavery is outlawed, protections extend, unevenly and imperfectly, but to ghouls and mutants, discrimination is challenged in law, even if not always in practice. These guardrails matter because they slow natural drift towards oligarchy. But the guardrails will only work as long as the person maintaining them stays in the driver's seat. And Tandy cannot live forever. When Tandy dies, the NCR does not collapse. And that's kind of the problem. It just continues forward on the momentum alone. Her successors inherit a functioning system, but not the philosophy that built it. Economic regulations weaken, land consolidates, agriculture output increases, but under fewer owners, political influence follows wealth, not votes. At the same time, the NCR's population explodes. By the mid 23rd century, hundreds of thousands of citizens depend on uninterrupted food, water, and trade. The Republic now has appetites, and appetites demand expansion. The Mojave campaign is not sold to NCR citizens as a conquest, it's sold as survival. Hoover Dam offers electricity and water on a scale the NCR cannot replace at home. New Vegas represents infrastructure already built, if it can only be folded into the Republic. Leaders argue that without Eastern expansion, food shortages and energy crises are inevitable, and they might be right. That's what makes the decision tragic instead of villainous. The NCR enters the Mojave not as an invader in its own mind, but as a stabilizing force, securing the future. But the Mojave doesn't care about intentions. The campaign drags on. The supply lines are stretched. The treaties stall. New Vegas refuses annexation while enjoying the protection. The Legion doesn't fight like a nation, but like a pressure system, exploiting every delay and every weakness. Back home, citizens still benefit, for now, and that's crucial. The costs are exported eastward, while the core states enjoy water, power, and economic growth. This creates the illusion that the system is still working, but it isn't. It's simply deferring the consequences. By the time the NCR fully commits to the Mojave, it's crossed an invisible threshold. It is no longer expanding to protect its own citizens. It's expanding to sustain itself. And that distinction changes everything. We're going to now examine the cracks that begin to widen: the economy, the currency, the politics, and the war, and how each one feeds the other until the system can no longer absorb the strain. Every large republic reaches a moment where growth stops being a solution and starts becoming a problem. For the NCR, that moment doesn't arrive with a single disaster. It arrives quietly, spread across ledgers, supply manifests, and campaign budgets. From the outside, the Republic still looks strong. Trade caravans move, power flows west, elections still happen. But inside, the system math is starting to fail because the NCR is now supporting an economy, an army, and a population that all assume expansion can and will continue forever. And nothing in the wasteland lasts forever. At its height, the NCR economy is impressive by post war standards. Agriculture is industrialized, Brahmin herds stretch across entire states. Trade houses like the Crimson Caravan and gun runners dominate logistics, manufacturing, and arms productions. Mills and factories hum back to life. For decades, this creates the impression of stability. But stability built on a scale has a weakness. It's expensive to maintain. As salvageable pre-war resources dry up in the core territories, the NCR economy becomes less about rediscovery and more about extraction. New land, new water, new energy, and new labor. Everything depends on access to frontier resources. This is where the inequality quietly accelerates. Small farmers are starting to struggle to compete with consolidated agricultural barons. Independent merchants are pushed out by massive trade houses with government contracts. Wage labor becomes the norm, but wages don't always keep up with prices. especially in frontier regions where supplies are inconsistent. The Republic still calls itself free, but freedom feels different depending on where you live. Money only works as long as people believe in it. The NCR dollar was once backed by precious metals, and before that, by dominance, because the NCR economy was the economy. Over time, confidence weakens, inflation creeps in. Frontier merchants increasingly prefer water backed bottle caps or legion coinage, which at least represents a tangible resource. This isn't about hyperinflation, it's worse. It's about doubt. When soldiers are paid in money traders won't accept, morale quickly erodes. When taxes don't stretch as far as they used to, public services degrade. And when confidence weakens, governments compensate the only way they know how, by spending more money. On paper, the NCR remains a representative democracy. The elections are held, senators still debate, and laws pass through committees. But wartime politics warp incentives. Campaigns are expensive. War contracts are lucrative. Agricultural monopolies fund politicians who promise stability and expansion. The result isn't dictatorship, it's gridlocked, shaped by money. The Republic doesn't lose its values, it loses its agility. This is where the NCR diverges sharply from Caesar's Legion. The Legion makes decisions instantly, brutally, and without dissent. And the NCR debates while its enemies move. Neither system is moral, but one is way faster. The NCR's army is the largest standing force in the wasteland. That fact alone deters invasion and buys time. But size hides fragility. Extended supply lines stretch across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. Garrisons rely on surplus gear. Recruits arrive undertrained. Veteran units are spread thin, tasked with holding positions rather than adapting to the changing threats. Leadership quality becomes uneven. This army can win battles, but it can't end wars. This becomes painfully clear in the Mojave. The NCR enters the Mojave expecting a campaign, but instead it gets a stalemate. Hoover Dam is secured, barely. New Vegas remains politically untouchable. The Legion adapts, applying pressure without committing to total war. Each side bleeds slowly, but only one of them can afford patience. The NCR's advantage, population, and industry, but that becomes a liability. Every soldier lost must be replaced, every outpost requires supplies, and every delay increases the cost. Back home, citizens still benefit from Mojave power and water, which means the public's pressure to withdraw is minimal. The war feels distant. Every republic has a moment when its self image collides with reality. For the NCR, one of those moments is Bitter Springs. An operation intended to neutralize a hostile group ends in the deaths of non combatants men, women, and children. The event is buried in official reports, the press barely touches it, but the soldiers carry the memories. This isn't unique in wartime history, but it matters because it reveals something uncomfortable. The NCR can commit atrocities not because it is evil, but because systems under strain stop distinguishing cleanly between necessity and convenience. Here's the most important thing to understand about the NCR's decline: none of these problems exist in isolation. Economic strain demands expansion. Expansion demands military presence. Military presence demands spending. And spending weakens the currency. Weakened currency erodes public trust. Eroded trust empowers elites who promise stability. And that cycle continues and accelerates. And the NCR is no longer steering itself, it's simply reacting. By the time of the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, the NCR is still capable of victory. That's what makes what happens next so devastating. Because the Republic isn't defeated on the battlefield, it is hollowed out by the assumption that it will always survive the next crisis. And then something happens, that no amount of planning accounts for. Empires don't prepare for the unimaginable, they prepare for the next budget cycle. Now we're going to examine the event that breaks the UNCR's sense of continuity entirely, the loss of its capital, the fragmentation that follows, and what the NCR's collapse teaches us about rebuilding civilization after the world ends. Most people assume the new California Republic falls in the Mojave, that it bleeds out at Hoover Dam, ground down by Caesar's legion, overextended supply lines and political arrogance. That would be an easy and clean story, but it would also be wrong. The NCR does not collapse because it loses a war. It collapses because it lost its center. Shady Sands is more than a city. It is the symbolic anchor of the NCR's legitimacy, the place where vault survivors became citizens, where laws replaced tribal authority, where the Republic's identity formed around the idea that civilizations could be rebuilt without becoming monstrous. It houses the Senate, the Council, the bureaucratic machinery that turns ideals into policy. As long as Shady Sands exists, the NCR feels permanent. And then, in 2283, it's destroyed by nuclear detonation. No warning, no evacuation, and no contingency plan. The Republic loses its capital in a way no slow decline could prepare for. Governments are built on continuity. Even when ledgers change, institutions persist. The laws carry forward, archives remain, and authority transfers. A nuclear strike doesn't just kill people, it breaks the continuity. The NCR doesn't merely lose a city, it loses records, leadership, coordination, and trust in the idea that the core states are safe. Refugees flood outward, administrative control fractures, and communication degrades. And for the first time since its founding, the NCR does not know who is in charge of what. This is the moment where all the stretch fractures finally meet. What follows is not immediate extinction, it's a fragmentation. NCR forces still exist, laws are still remembered, rangers still wear the bear. But without a central authority, the Republic becomes a collection of remnants instead of a unified state. Some regions revert back to local governance, others fall under de facto military control. Former NCR territories become contested space, no longer protected by the assumption of overwhelming response. The illusion of permanence is gone, and once that illusion breaks, everything else becomes negotiable. This reframes the Hoover Dam in a way most players never consider. Even if the NCR wins the second battle of Hoover Dam, it does so as a wounded state. The power still flows, and the water still moves west, but the political entity meant to manage it is severely compromised. Infrastructure outlives ideology. The NCR can hold the territory. It cannot easily govern it anymore. This is what collapse looked like in an advanced society. Not sudden ruin, but control without coherence. Years later, fragments of the NCR still exist. In Los Angeles, remnants operate from places like the Griffith Observatory, scientists, soldiers, and civilians, all trying to preserve something of the old republic. Figures like Lee Moldaver represent a desperate hope that technology, order, or innovation can restore what was lost. But the world has moved on. These remnants aren't destroyed because they're weak. They're destroyed because they're isolated. The NCR does not die in a single moment. It simply fades into pieces. It would be easy to frame this as a cautionary tale about democracy failing, but that would be lazy. The NCR succeeds longer than any other post war society, precisely because of its values: the rule of law, civil rights, economic cooperation, and institutional memory. These things do work, but they work so well that people forget how fragile they actually are. The NCR does not fail because it tries to rebuild civilization. It fails because rebuilding civilization requires restraint as much as it does ambition. And the Legion collapses because it's built on brutality and myth. The NCR collapses because it's built on growth without limits. Both systems do fall, but for vastly different reasons. And that's the uncomfortable truth Fallout keeps returning to. There is no ideology that saves you from logistics, scale, and unintended consequences. The reason the NCR resonates isn't because it's nostalgia, it's recognition. It looks like a society that we can understand, one that believes in progress that is linear. Resources can always be secured, and tomorrow will resemble today if we just manage it correctly. Fallout doesn't say that belief is evil, it just says it's dangerous. The New California Republic does not disappear completely. Its people survive, its ideas persist, and its symbols remain meaningful, but its certainty is gone. And in the wasteland, certainty is the most valuable resource of all. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, consider subscribing to the Hyperfix Hub. If you had to choose, would you rather live under the NCR, knowing it might collapse, or under something harsher that promises more permanence? Let me know in the comments. Thank you very much.